Hi, everybody. So we're going to draw in the layers of peritoneum, and in doing so, we're going to think about the cavities that this will form in the abdomen and the relationship in the adult animal of where these mesenteries lie, and etc. So to do this, we're going to use a schematic up here and think about the original formation of the GI system. And again, it's helpful to apply this to the adult animal, but basically the stomach and intestines begin as a simple suspended tube, all right, and then they go through a series of turns so that they reach their adult disposition. But the stomach is suspended by a dorsal and ventral mesentery, and the intestines from the duodenum down through the descending colon is suspended by a dorsal mesentery, and they are not connected to a ventral mesentery. So the spleen and pancreas are also within the dorsal mesentery, and the liver is within the ventral mesentery. And you can think about another important thing to think about is blood vessels do come down through these mesenteries to supply the organs. And again, if you think in cross, we're thinking about the layers of peritoneum. The dorsal and ventral mesenteries, we also can refer to them as connecting peritoneums. Visceral peritoneum, all the organs are usually the stomach and intestines are surrounded by visceral peritoneum. We'll talk about in a minute. And the parietal peritoneum. Parietal means wall lines the outer surface. So to begin with, we're going to draw some of the layers of peritoneum, and the easiest one to start with would be the parietal peritoneum. So that's going to line the inner surface of the abdominal wall, the ventral muscles, and the dorsal muscles, etc. And we'll have to make a deviation of this parietal peritoneum around the kidney, and we'll continue around and make this a closed surface. So that would be the parietal peritoneum. Then we'll move on, and we'll do another simple one, and we'll take this color red, and we will outline the organs. This is the stomach, and this would be outlined in visceral peritoneum. This is the liver. We outline this in visceral peritoneum. This is the spleen. I outline that in visceral peritoneum. And just some simplified view of the intestines. We've simplified this for the sake of our discussion. We would outline all of these structures in visceral peritoneum. Now, the next step we're going to do is consider the connecting peritoneum. So again, the connecting peritoneum comes and connects parietal to visceral or visceral to visceral. So to begin with, we're going to consider one of the connecting peritoneums is this dorsal mesentery that becomes the greater omentum. So where does the greater omentum originate from? It originates from the caudal stomach. It then connects to the spleen. The spleen is within that. The visceral peritoneum kind of surrounds the spleen, but the connecting peritoneum between the stomach and the spleen is the greater omentum. And then if you were to draw this, it comes off the spleen and it runs caudally here in the abdomen, back up to about the level of the bladder, and then it folds back on itself. And this is the greater omentum, folds back on itself, and it comes back and goes all the way back up to the dorsal body wall. And again, this is the greater omentum, and that is a connecting peritoneum that was originally this dorsal mesentery. So within that, the pancreas be within it up here in this deep leaf, but there's a superficial and deep leaf. And this is important because it kind of sets up some areas here. The omentum bursa is a space between the superficial and deep leaf of the greater omentum, but this thing always lubricates and sits underneath the organs here in the ventral aspect of the abdomen. And again, it maintains this relationship of running from the stomach to the dorsal body wall, just because of its incredible growth caudally during the development of the organs and the development of the abdomen. It still maintains that. It still comes from the stomach, and again, goes around the spleen. When it's around the spleen, it's visceral peritoneum by definition, but then it continues with the greater omentum, and it goes all the way back to the dorsal body wall. The other type of the greater omentum would be considered a connecting peritoneum. The other type of connecting peritoneum is going to be the mesentery. It's called meso part of the intestine. It's labeled. So For example, if it suspends the colon, it's mesocolon. If it suspends the jejunum, it's mesojejunum, etc. But in our simple example here, the visceral peritoneum surrounds the intestinal organs, and this connecting peritoneum is going to come off and head back up dorsally, and they're going to come off each part of the organ, and they kind of run together here into a common mesentery that goes up to the dorsal body wall, and it's effectively, this is what is referred to as the root of the mesentery, all right? And that is the root of the mesentery. And remember, what runs within that root, that twists around the intestine and things like that, there is major blood supply that comes down to these organs within the root of the mesentery. But that would be considered a connecting peritoneum, but it is basically referred to by surgeons as the mesentery. So this is, green one is the greater omentum. This is a connecting peritoneum, but we're going to call it the mesentery. So we'll just say mesentery. Now, one final bit of connecting peritoneum we're going to talk about, because these are still connecting peritoneums. We're going to think about this connection up here between the stomach and the ventral body wall and going around the liver. And this first part here that goes between the stomach and the liver would be the lesser omentum. That's the connecting peritoneum here that runs between the stomach and the liver, and then coming off the ventral aspect of the liver and going all the way to the umbilicus here within the abdomen is this fatty filled structure in the adult that is the falciform ligament. All right, so the falciform ligament is going to be a remnant of this ventral mesentery between the liver and the ventral body wall, and this is with that cranial-abdominal incision. You often encounter this. It's filled with fat, and this is where the umbilical vein ran in the fetus, but basically it is a connecting mesentery that does have ramifications. When you open up the abdomen, you sit there and look at a fat-filled structure. So by drawing these in, what do you get a feel for? You get a feel for the length of the greater omentum, and you're creating these spaces, right? So what are some of these spaces if you consider the four basic spaces? Well, this space up here would be the, by definition, this would be extra-abdominal, because you're kind of outside the abdominal cavity, so that space would be extra-abdominal. The space behind the parietal peritoneum, where the kidneys are and some ureters and aorta and things like that, that would be considered the retroperitoneal space. The space basically by definition between parietal peritoneum and connecting or visceral would be the peritoneal cavity. Now in life, that wouldn't be this huge space. It obviously would be filled with mesenteries, fat, vessels. It wouldn't be a huge vacuum normally of gas or air, but it would be filled with, again, mesentery arteries, which arteries are in the mesenteries, fat, organs, things like this. But this would be the peritoneal cavity. And finally, the other term used for structures is intraperitoneal, and that is basically in the parenchyma of the organs surrounded by visceral peritoneum. So these organs are not considered to be in the peritoneal cavity. They're considered to be intraperitoneal. All right, and what is in the peritoneal cavity by definition is nothing, just a small amount of serous fluid. So now that you've drawn this image, you can kind of look at it and you get a little more appreciation for the extent of the greater omentum than when you're just simply looking in the patient or the cadaver and you can just see little bits of it. You can appreciate how long it is and where it travels, and also the idea of the mesentery and how it comes up to the root of the mesentery and it contains blood vessels. And you go back to Dr. Salisbury's question, what are the structural and functional differences between omentum, the greater omentum, especially down in this ventral loose area here, and the mesentery? And the prompts for that were that the omentum, with its lengths and forms these cavities, it can be used to seal leaks. It is a fluid absorber. It can be used to wall off areas of inflammation or infection. It can bring blood supply to an area, or physiological drain. During surgery, it can be tacked and placed in a lot of different areas. And if you think about looking in the animal, the greater omentum has more fat. It's lacy in appearance. It's easy to tear and has many little vessels, blood vessels that can be sacrificed. So this thing, it gives you an appreciation for how long it is and how it can be moved around and tacked to different places. And then the mesentery, like this mesentery suspending the just intestines here, they're generally considered shorter than the greater omentum. They're much more substantial, they have less fat, and they have much larger vessels that can't be sacrificed. And I will say as a quick note, this very dorsal part of the greater omentum does have some arteries that supply the stomach and spleen and is essential. But so we're really focused on this elongated area, the greater omentum here. And if you remember, the root of the mesentery is formed around the craniomesenteric artery. So that's the major vessel coming down and supplying all these organs.